The year is 1945 in the bustling city of Chicago, but the police are left baffled by a series of crimes that were unlike anything they had seen ever before. What was most confusing to them was a chilling note written on the wall of one of the victims. But soon they would discover that things were going to get so much worse, and they would be the most shocking crimes the city had ever seen. But what I find the most shocking about this entire case is the way that it was handled by the police, the media, and by those who are entrusted to ensure justice is being served. This would be the kind of story where the more you dig into the facts, the more you think to yourself, wait a minute, what is actually going on here and what really happened? Was justice served? But to get the answer to those questions and to unravel the details of this complex case, we have to go back to the very beginning. Welcome to my channel, Weird Wild Stories. I typically discuss things that are strange, dark, and creepy. And today, I'm bringing you the details behind the infamous case in which the perpetrator was called the Lipstick Killer. Let's go ahead and get right into it. It's the 1940s in the city of Chicago. The war is over and the soldiers are home, and the city is booming. Yet, in quiet neighborhoods, many of the people still leave their doors unlocked, and they think that nothing bad is ever going to happen, free of heinous crimes. But that was all about to change quickly. Meanwhile, in the suburb of Evanston, Illinois, a young man named William Heirens was showing promise. He was admitted early to the University of Chicago's special program at the age of 16. But even as he entered the campus, he was harboring a secret. You see, William was a fan of breaking and entering, and he was carrying on a secret life of burglarizing homes just for the fun of it. William was born on November 15th, 1928. The son of George and Margaret Heirens. He grew up in the nearby suburb of Lincolnwood. His father, George, was the son of immigrants from Luxembourg, and his mother was a homemaker. The family was quite poor, and they struggled, but what bothered William the most was the fact that his parents argued incessantly. William would later explain that this is the sort of thing that led him to commit petty crimes. At a very young age, he began to wander the streets just to get away from the turmoil in his home. He claims that he stole for fun, just for the thrill of it, as an effort to relieve tension. When he was just 13 years old, he would be arrested for carrying a loaded gun, and when the police would search his parents' home, they found a stash of stolen items hidden in a storage shed on the roof of a nearby building. They found cameras, jewelry, radios, weapons. This is where he kept all the items he found while he was out stealing from his neighbors. He would actually confess to 11 burglaries, and he was sent to the Gibault School for Wayward Boys for several months. Soon after, he was arrested for theft and sentenced to 3 years at the St. Bede Academy, where he proved to be an excellent student. He was accepted into University of Chicago's Special Learning Program just before his release in 1945 at the age of 16. To pay his expenses, he worked several evenings a week as an usher, but he also did return to committing burglaries. Despite the issues with petty crimes, he was a truly gifted student, and he had high hopes of becoming an electrical engineer, and he was on his way. He moved to campus and made himself busy learning to play chess, learning to dance, and he even bought a radio phonograph and began a collection of South American and classical music. Later on, he would say that he found the coursework at this time to be quite difficult because he had some new distractions like girlfriends and a social life. Some of the classmates that remember him said that he was very popular with the ladies. This newfound social life and all of these distractions, it kind of put him on pause with his life of crime for a bit. But by Christmas of 1945, he was back at it on the streets committing petty thefts. Unbeknownst to William, however, darkness was already brewing in the city of Chicago behind the scenes. On June 5th, 1945, 43-year-old woman named Josephine Ross was found lifeless in her Chicago apartment. She had been stabbed repeatedly, and oddly, her head was wrapped in a dress. She was found with dark hairs that she had clutched in one of her hands tightly, and they also noticed that the entire apartment had been ransacked. But no valuables were taken from the residence. The police were baffled at that time, and they really did not have a clue or any real leads as to who had done this. Before they could even begin to fully process this murder, another one would pop up just a couple months later. Frances Brown was a 33-year-old Chicago resident who would also be found lifeless in her home. She was shot in the head and also stabbed. In fact, there was a knife protruding from her neck when police arrived on the scene. And just like the previous murder, her home was ransacked, but nothing notable of value was taken. But with this particular crime scene, there was something else that really stood out and left the public in fear. There was a message written in lipstick on the bathroom wall. It was apparently left by the killer, which read, quote, "For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself," end quote. There were mistakes with the grammar and the spelling, but the message was clear. And the press ran with this, and soon it was seen everywhere. Stick killer associated with this case. The city was now on high alert and on edge, and the police had more pressure on them than ever to get to the bottom of these murders. But things were about to get so much worse. Fast forward to January 7th, 1946, and a 6-year-old little girl named Suzanne Degnan was found to be missing from her home in a neighborhood of Chicago. She was apparently taken right from her bedroom window, and there was nothing at the scene really to give them very much of leads. There was no body. There was a ladder near her bedroom window, and there was a note. It was a ransom note demanding $20,000 and a request that the FBI and the police be left out of this. The note also contained instructions, odd ones, that they wanted the bills to be in 5s and 10s. And they also wanted the parents to burn this letter. They were finished reading it. And in addition to the note, a man began to repeatedly call Suzanne's parents demanding ransom money. But as far as the ransom note goes and the person calling them, that would prove to be nothing. The man calling was just committing a hoax in reality. But a massive investigation was underway immediately. And acting on an anonymous tip, the police would discover something chilling in a sewer just a block away from Suzanne's residence. It would be her severed head. Her right leg was found in a catch basin. Her torso was found in another storm drain, her left leg in another drain, and her arms were found a month later in another sewer after her other remains had already been buried. Blood was also found in the drains of laundry tubs in the basement laundry room of a nearby apartment building. Police questioned hundreds of people, administering polygraph exams to about 170, and several times they claimed to have captured the killer, although, of course, suspects proved not to be the killer and were released. The coroner would fix the time of death at between 12:30 and 1 a.m., and they also stated that a very sharp knife had been used to expertly dismember the body. Also, a basement laundry room was proven to have been a scene of involvement with this crime, although they think that she was already dead when she was taken there. Experts would say that the killer was likely someone who had an extensive knowledge of human anatomy or a background in dissection. They would go on to claim that not an average doctor would be able to carry out the skill involved in this dismemberment. It had to be a meat cutter, the coroner added, because it was a very clean job with no signs of hacking. Shortly after, a 65-year-old man named Hector Verberg, who was a janitor in the building where Susan lived, was arrested and treated as the suspect. Police told the press, "This is the man," despite many discrepancies between him and what they had said previously about things to expect from the perpetrator. For one thing, he had no experience as a butcher or surgeon or anything like that. Police noted that Verberg, though, had frequented the so-called murder room, or the laundry room they were talking about earlier, and also the grimy state of the ransom note suggested it had been written by a dirty hand, such as that of a janitor, which sounds ridiculous to me and like a pretty weak argument. And not to mention the fact that this was a 65-year-old senior citizen man, and there was really no evidence linking him to this murder. But that did not stop the police from putting this man through 48 hours of brutal interrogations, which was not uncommon at that time. A suspect could be denied food and sleep and endure torture during a police investigation. Also be beaten, threatened, and kept away from their families at the police station for days on end, all in an attempt to get a confession. But throughout this interrogation, Verberg continued to deny involvement in this murder. And luckily, a janitor's union lawyer secured his release. But Verberg was not walking away unharmed, and he would say this of the experience, quote, "They threw me in the cell and blindfolded me. They handcuffed my hands behind my back and pulled me up on bars until my toes touched the floor. I didn't eat. I had to go to the hospital. I am so sick. Any more and I would have confessed to anything." And I think that last statement really says a lot. As is the case with many coerced confessions, people just can't take anything beyond a certain point a breaking point. They can only endure so much pain and torture before they just give in for it to stop. And now, thankfully, today, these types of tactics are illegal and would not be tolerated in the United States, and most likely would not be tolerated legally anywhere in the world. It was determined that Verburg, a Belgian immigrant, could not write English well enough to have penned even this crudely written note. He successfully, though, would go on to sue the Chicago Police Department and would receive $15,000, which would be around $250,000 in today's money. That doesn't make up for the harsh treatment of this poor guy. However, I was happy to read that at least he got some type of compensation after all that he went through. The police would continue with their investigation and arrest more promising leads. However, they would all fall through, and the pressure to solve these murders was on the rise, and it was greater than ever. June 26, 1946. Now months have passed. On this particular day, William Heirens set out to the post office where he was going to try to cash a $1,000 savings bond. He needed the money to take his girlfriend out on a date. And in preparation for carrying a large amount of money around with him afterwards, he brought a revolver with him as well. Now, William would go to the post office and find that it was closed. And so he decided he would get the money another way. And he resorted to going back to his life before and thought committing a burglary in a building that he had stolen from before might be a way to find some money. William would say later, when speaking of this incident, that he had just lifted a dollar bill from inside an open apartment when a tenant spotted him immediately. He ran up the back stairs of a nearby building and was cornered by a policeman, and he pulled out his gun. Now, there are disagreements about what happened next. According to Officer Tim Constant, he would say that William pulled out his revolver and pulled the trigger, but that the gun misfired. According to William, however, he says that he never tried to shoot the policeman, and instead he says the officer fired 3 times with his own revolver. And so then William leapt down the stairs at him and they got into a struggle. An off-duty officer was nearby. His name was Abner Cunningham. He was actually in his swim trunks because he had been at the beach. He arrived at the scene, saw the struggle, and he picked up a stack of 3 flower pots sitting there, which he proceeded to smash onto William's head one at a time. By the time the 3rd one hit him, William was knocked unconscious. And after this, his head was bandaged and he was taken to the police hospital at Cook County Jail, where they had him strapped to a bed. William would claim that after he started to wake up, he continued to fake being unconscious in order to sort of listen in to what they were saying and what was going on. He heard someone say that he was a suspect in the Degnan case, and he could also feel them taking his fingerprints as well. Now, meanwhile, the police were conducting searches at both the place where Williams was staying at school and his parents' home. And they found his stash from all his burglaries, and they started to compare these items to evidence from the murder scenes. They claim they match. They claim his fingerprints match too, and from that moment on, Heirens is no longer just a petty thief. In their eyes, they had their man. They believed he was the lipstick killer. He was taken into custody where he would be questioned for 6 days straight. He was denied a lawyer. He was given sodium pentothal, also known as truth serum. He was even hypnotized. And all of this was done without his consent and also without the consent of his parents. William was only 17 years old. He was a minor, but he was treated like he was guilty, without evidence, without real proof that he had anything to do who had actually committed the murders. Heirens claimed that he recalled little of the drug-induced interrogation, but he does remember that when police asked for George's last name, he told them he could not remember it, but that it was a murmuring name. Police translated this to Merman, and the media would dramatize it and call it Murder Man. But William claimed he never said that and has very little memory of what he said under the influence of this powerful drug. So what he said was scheduled for several days because Heirens was in too much pain to cooperate. Of course, he had received a lumbar puncture without anesthesia. It was pretty painful, I imagine. But when the polygraph was administered, authorities announced that the results were inconclusive. Right before the polygraph, Heirens spoke to a police captain named Michael Ahern. With state's attorney William Toohey and a stenographer at hand, Heirens offered an indirect confession, confirming his claim he had made while under sodium pentothal, that his alter ego, George Merman, might have been responsible for the crime. George was actually Heirens' middle name and also his father's name, by the way. He would also claim that George had given him the loot to hide in his dormitory room. Police hunted for this George. They questioned his friends and family and associates, but they never did find him. According to the authorities, under the influence, William claimed that he met George when he was 13, and that George would send him out prowling at night to commit burglaries. Now, Heirens allegedly claimed that he frequently assumed the blame for George, first for petty theft, then assault, and now murder. And psychologists explained that in the same way that children concoct imaginary friends, Heirens invented this personality to keep his antisocial feelings and actions separate from the person that people knew him to be, who went to school and dated girls and was normal. While handwriting analysts did not... 12 days later, though, Chief of Detective Walter Storms alleged that the bloody smudge on the left door jamb was that of Heirens, which to me seems like shaky ground to merit a murder conviction. Then there was the eyewitness who had claimed to have seen someone leaving the premises around the time of Suzanne's disappearance. The witness was not able to identify Heirens in a photo as the man whom he had seen, but a few days later, he identified Heirens in person at a court hearing. Again, I find this unsettling, that they could even use this in court as evidence when the eyewitness cannot seem to make up their mind. Even with such little evidence, Heirens' defense attorneys believed that he was guilty, and their aim was to spare Heirens from execution in the electric chair. They pressured him to accept a plea bargain. Remember, he's only 17 years old. No consultation was done early on with his parents or with a lawyer. He was basically just told what to do, and he had to do it. The plea deal stipulated that he would serve 1 life sentence if he would agree to confess to the murders of Josephine Ross, Frances Brown, and Suzanne Degnan. With the help of his lawyers, Heirens began drafting a confession, using a Chicago Tribune article as a guide. He was actually quoted as saying this, quote, "As it turned out, the Tribune article was quite helpful as it provided me with a lot of details that I didn't know. My attorneys rarely changed anything outright, but I could tell by their faces if I had made a mistake, or they would say something like, 'Now, Bill, is that really the way it happened?' And then I would change my story because obviously it went against what they wanted me to say or what was known," end quote. Both Heirens and his parents signed this confession. The parties agreed to a date of July 30th for him to deliver his official confession. William would not deliver for them as they wanted, though, and instead he gave non-committal answers to the press, which made the prosecutor angry. William said that the prosecutor was emphasizing the word truth so much, and William asked him if he really wanted the truth, and the prosecutor assured him that he did. William said, "When I was being forced to lie to save myself, it made me angry. So I told him the truth, and everyone got upset." The prosecutor withdrew the previously agreed sentence of 1 life term with several minor charges and changed it to 3 life terms to run consecutively and threatened Heirens with a death penalty if he was convicted at trial. The prosecutor also threatened Heirens with the murder of Estelle Carey, another unsolved murder, even though Heirens was away at boarding school at the time of this murder. So he agreed to the new plea agreement. The public allocution was again held in Prosecutor Tuohy's office, where Heirens talked and answered questions, even reenacting parts of the murders to which he had confessed, at their request, of course. Police Captain Michael Ahern believed that Heirens was culpable when he heard how familiar that he was with the Browns' apartment. Heirens said later, quote, "I confess to save my life," end quote. On August 7, 1946, Heirens assumed full responsibility for the 3 murders in public and before the press. The prosecution prompted him to reenact the Degnan crime. On September 4th, with Heirens' parents and the victims' families present, Heirens admitted his guilt on the burglary and murder charges. That night, Heirens tried ending his time on Earth in his cell. He timed it to coincide during a shift change of the prison guards. But he was discovered before he died, and he later said that despair had drove him to this, stating, quote, "Everyone believed I was guilty. If I weren't alive, I felt I could avoid being adjudged guilty by the law, and thereby gain some victory, but I wasn't even successful at that. Before I walked into the courtroom, my counsel told me to just enter a plea of guilty and keep my mouth shut afterward. I didn't even have a trial," end quote. Whenever I think of this, it really makes me sad. Here was a 17-year-old boy guilty of committing some petty theft, yes, but guilty of murder? In my opinion, there is no definitive evidence that points to his guilt. On September 5th, the judge sentenced Heirens to 3 consecutive life terms. As Heirens waited to be transferred to the Stateville prison, Sheriff Michael Mulcahy asked Heirens whether Suzanne Degnan had suffered when she was killed. Heirens answered this, quote, "I can't tell you if she suffered, Sheriff Mulcahy. I didn't kill her. Tell Mr. Degnan to please look after his other daughter, because whoever killed Suzanne is still out there," end quote. Within days of his confession in open court, Heirens denied any responsibility for the murders. And Mary Jane Blanchard, the daughter of murder victim Josephine Ross, was among the first people to believe him, saying, quote, "I cannot believe that this young man Heirens committed the murder of my mother. He just does not fit into the picture of my mother's death. I have looked at all the things that he stole, and there was nothing of my mother's things among them." End quote. In the many years that have passed since this conviction, there have been a lot of people who believe in William's innocence. And many people fought for his clemency and his release over the years. Firstly, there were many inconsistencies in his so-called confession that were coerced, in my opinion, and in the opinions of several experts. And yet it appears that he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The police were desperate to catch someone to be held responsible for these murders that were causing fear and panic in their city. And people were looking to them and putting great pressure on them to get this solved. And there comes a young man, William, right on their radar, who is committing a crime. They catch him in their net and they don't let him go. Under the threat of death of the electric chair and hours and days of torture and a spinal tap, this 17-year-old boy felt he had no other choice but to confess to something, even something he didn't even do, to save his own life. In his own words, he said it this way, quote, "The thing is, once you're dead, there's no clearing things up. But when you're alive, you still have a chance to prove that you weren't guilty. So I was better off being alive than being dead," end quote. While serving one of the nation's longest prison terms, Mr. Heirens became the first prisoner in Illinois to earn a degree from a 4-year college. He also managed the prison garden factory and set up several other educational programs. In the years towards the end of his life, diabetes damaged his eyesight and he had to use a wheelchair for mobility. Heirens maintained all along through this long prison sentence that he only confessed because authorities said he would get the death penalty if he did not. According to CBS News, in 1995, attorney Jed Stone said a re-examination of the case showed that the fingerprint evidence used against Heirens was fraudulent and may have been planted at one of the murder scenes by the police. Experts also said handwriting samples used against Heirens were not actually his. Despite all of these glaring inconsistencies in the case, faulty evidence, etc., William was never let out of prison. There was a clemency hearing in 2002 that obviously did not go through, and he was up for parole many times during his 65-year sentence. On March 5th, 2012, he was found unresponsive in his cell at Dixon Correctional Center. He was later pronounced dead at the University of Illinois at Chicago Medical Center. He was 83 years old. So, was William Heirens really the lipstick killer? We may never know the absolute truth. In my opinion, I think they got the wrong guy. But what do you think? Do you think he was innocent or guilty? Do you believe that he should have been granted clemency, finally, at least when he was older? I don't believe he posed any kind of threat to society at that point. Leave your thoughts and comments below because I would really love to hear what you think. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you found this video interesting, please like and subscribe for more of my weird, wild stories. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and as always, stay weird. And I'll see you in the next one.